Okay, so we were just seeing if we couldn't reorder ourselves a little. That does conclude the examination of corporate matters of the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water. Thank you very much for your time. I'd now like to call officers from the Department in relation to Outcome 1, Program 1.1, Reducing Australia's Greenhouse Gas Emissions. Right.
Okay, so far so good.
Okay, are we ready to go? We might start off with Senator Rennick.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks, Chair. Hi guys, how you going? Look, I hope this is the right section. I just wanted an update on the progress of where we are in terms of the 82% getting the 82% of renewables in the grid by 2030, in terms of reaching that target, and where we're at sort of on the 24th of February 2025 in terms of percentage of completion.
Yes.
Yes.
So, Senator, that is in program 1.2, which comes next. So the bifurcation is climate change now, energy next. I know it's not easy, to be fair.
Yeah.
The reason I was looking around was to see if any of the team were here.
Okay, no, that's all right. I can come
back.
But
they'll be on next.
Sure. I just want to, and there's an article in the Financial Review last week about there's a blowout in transmission lines from about 2.6 billion to about 4.1. I've spoken to you about this before.
You have.
About there's a fixed rate, a regulated rate of return on transmission lines.
Yeah.
Does that regulated rate of return apply to the blowout figure or the initial projected cost?
So what I'll do on that is effectively, thank you for telling us that.
Yeah.
The team will have heard that and they'll be ready to deal with that question when you...
On 1.2.
In 1.2, yep.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, cheers, thanks.
Excellent. Senator Waters.
Chair, good morning everyone, and hello Minister, thanks for your time. Can I just start off with some questions about just one of the Queensland coal mine extensions that was approved right before Christmas, the BHP Caval Ridge mine. It was approved to expand its operations into new areas of land and to mine an additional 159 megatonnes of coal over the next 30 years. And I'm interested particularly in the documentation for this expansion, which provide no information about greenhouse gas emissions from this expansion. Initially, the preliminary documentation documents asked for that information, and then there's a record in BHP Mitsubishi's document saying, following the receipt of the request for information and subsequent discussion with the department, it's understood that responses to emissions information were not required. So my first question is, why did you initially ask for Scope 1, 2 and 3 data for this coal mine expansion, and then after discussions decide that in fact no, you didn't need that data after all?
Good morning, Senator Waters. Edwina Johnson, Branch Head for Safeguard Mechanism and Carbon Leakage Review. Part of your question does actually go to the operations of EPBC colleagues in the department, which is a different outcome. But I am in the position to inform you that on the 19th of December last year, the EPBC Act delegate provided advice to... the approval date was the 19th of December last year. On the 20th of December, the EPBC delegate provided advice to the Secretary, the Minister for Climate Change and also the head of the CCA that the maximum Scope 1 emissions from the Caval Ridge mine, horse pit extension project were 0.12 million tonnes a year and 4.31 million tonnes over the decades between 2025 and 2062. But with apologies, it is the EPBC colleagues that you would need to ask that sort of question about asking about the emissions information. But what I've just quoted you is the emissions information that was provided then by the EPBC delegate to the Secretary and others.
Thank you. So how did you have that data if you had discontinued your request for it?
Well, Senator, that's the part that I'm unable to answer because I sit in the climate change group, not the EPBC group, and that's a question for outcome 2.
Okay. So how would you normally get that information in your group via an EPBC request for expansion for yet more pollution?
We would get it in the same way as we got it from this project, a letter from the EPBC delegate to the Secretary and others.
So the proponent doesn't come directly to you, they go through the EPBC process. Okay,
That's
so
correct.
ergo, if that information is not in the EPBC process, there's no way for you to be informed what the emissions are.
Well, in some way, the emissions did get to the Secretary in this way. So the EPBC colleagues did receive at some point information on emissions that they then provided to the Secretary. So in this instance, we were provided Scope 1 information as required under the Climate Change Act.
So can you just tell me, please, what section I ask the EPBC?
Outcome 2, the EPBC environmental.
Okay, great. Outcome 2. All right, thank you. Just sticking with that particular mine and now asking about the methane emissions, the IEA estimates that coal mine methane emissions, particularly from open-cut coal mines like this one are likely to be underestimated by up to 80%, and they assert that coal companies are dramatically underreporting their emissions. So the existing Caval Ridge mine, not the extension that was just approved 6 days before Christmas, but the existing mine reported 314 megatons in 2023 to the Clean Energy Regulator, but there's been some independent investigation that show that it's actually potentially 5 times as much as that. So I'd like to know, please, were methane emission estimates reported in the Caval Ridge's referral or approval for the extension, or in any comms between the Climate and Environment Ministers? Basically, how do you get that information about the Scope 1 methane emissions?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. So the information that we receive is on the basis of carbon dioxide equivalent. So that would be using the global warming potential of methane, then converted to a carbon dioxide equivalent. I'd have to take on notice for you if we received anything specific to methane for that project.
Okay. So what is the government doing to fix Australia's coal mine methane reporting problems and ensure that companies are reporting, in fact, the true scope of their gassy methane emissions?
Thanks, Senator. Kath Rowley, Head of the Emissions Reduction Division. Senator, as you know, Australia takes great pride in its greenhouse gas inventory work, and we've got more than 2 decades now of continuous improvement and innovation, including in relation to the estimation of emissions from coal and gas activities, including fugitive methane. We've expanded the coverage of the inventory over time. We go beyond minimum requirements under the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement requirements, and we keep a close eye on new research, data and technologies at home and abroad to continue to improve the quality of our inventory. You'll be aware that the Climate Change Authority made a number of recommendations in its most recent review of the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Scheme, including in relation to improvements and just kind of better improving our understanding of fugitive methane emissions. And the government released its response to that review last year. We've taken a number of actions in relation to implement the government response. Most recently, just last week, the government announced the remaining members of an expert panel, which is going to provide advice to the government on the the role that new technologies and emerging methods can make to estimating fugitive methane emissions from coal and gas facilities. That complements other work that we're doing, including commissioning further research and analysis of different technologies, the different estimates that they generate, and what that tells us about the kind of validity and usefulness of different technologies to estimating those emissions. Also contributions, including internationally, to the International Methane Emissions Observatory, I think it's called, the IMEO, where we collaborate with other countries to better understand technologies and methods for fugitive methane. And in terms of how that all maps back to our domestic emissions reduction, domestic emissions measurement scheme, the NGA scheme, we've made some changes last year as that first tranche of activity to implement the government response to the CCA review, and we've got a work program that continues for both developing new methods and removing the availability to some of the the more generic methods for estimating those emissions from those facilities. I can go into detail if you like, but that's the big picture.
Yeah, thank you. That is very helpful. Perhaps if you could provide me the detail on notice. I'm interested in the generic measurements that you imply as sort of being phased out as you develop newer, presumably more accurate methods of measuring fugitive methane emissions. So is it the case that those generic measurements will have applied for all of the coal mine approvals essentially to date, and so therefore potentially you've got a whole lot of coal mines that are even more gaseous and producing even more CO2 equivalents than you had initially estimated? What's going to be done about that if our figures are so wrong and these gassy mines that unfortunately keep getting approved and extended by the current government, if we've radically underestimated their methane to date, then how are you dealing with that? Not to mention, how's the climate going to deal with that?
Senator, I think that there's an assumption in your question which I wouldn't necessarily agree with. So there are a range of estimates claimed with respect to the emissions from different facilities, including coal and gas operations in Australia, but some of them are made using new technologies which have not been proven to be accurate for the uses that they're put to in the studies that publish those estimates. And indeed the people who publish those studies acknowledge the significant uncertainty in the estimates arising from the application of these new techniques. Also, when you change the methods that you're using for greenhouse gas emissions estimation, it doesn't necessarily mean that you get a higher estimate. It's so when we have different tiers of estimation methodologies, and some based on more average emissions factors, and others require more and more detailed direct measurement of the emissions from specific facilities. And in many cases, indeed I think in all of Australia's, for example, underground coal mines, all mines are already using those higher tiered methods. And so it's not that we have a widespread use of methods that would necessarily underestimate the emissions at all. That's not the case.
Okay, it sounds like it's all very speculative, with no disrespect meant to the expertise of the people, no doubt doing their best to try and estimate this. But it sounds like your old methods potentially are underestimating, and your new methods, you're saying, well, they might not be accurate either.
That's not what if that's the impression you got from my answer,
that's the impression that I got.
No. So I think that the speculation is with respect to the direction of the effect when you move to new methods, and I would say that that's not always that the estimates would go up. Sometimes they would go down, and how that maps through, we regularly revise estimates for greenhouse gas emissions at the national level through our continuous improvement program for the national inventory, and we companies also, as methods are revised and improved, update their own facility level estimates as well.
So why do you keep
the calls if you want to?
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple extra on this one, and then I'm finished with that section. So why? I'm not sure if this one better belongs to the minister. Why do you keep approving gassy coal mine expansions when you still don't have a clear picture of precisely how much fugitive methane emissions these gassy coal mines are producing, knowing that methane is whatever it is, 26 times more potent than CO2?
So, Senator, the emissions from facilities are measured and reported in accordance with the requirements under the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Scheme. The methods that Australia uses are world-class, so we require standards of measurement and reporting which are at the top tier of methods that are available internationally, and indeed in some cases we're the only country applying those high-tier methods to these facilities at all. So Australia already makes the best estimates that are possible for different kinds of facilities and different kinds of emissions, and we are, regardless, always looking for ways to improve those estimates and to make best use of the emerging technologies that continue to become available over time. So I don't think that it's correct to say that the decisions or the work is being done in ignorance of the impacts. We're making the best estimates available based on the international rules under the IPCC and the high-tier requirements that we have translated through to the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Scheme.
Okay, just last question. You mentioned the expert panel on methane reporting that you've just finished appointing people to last week. Given that their work is now presumably going to commence, will the government put in place a moratorium on approving gassy open-cut coal mines until that expert panel assessing measurement of methane can actually finish its work? Surely you want to find out what they're going to say before you keep approving new coal mine expansions.
Senator, we have the highest standards of any country on earth in these questions. I'll put it a bit more colloquially than Ms Rowley put it. She's taken you through, I suspect not for the first time, the department and the government's approach to engaging the best scientific advice. As she's indicated, we have a world-leading approach in Australia, higher standards of any country on earth in relation to these questions. We're not... there's no lack of curiosity and engagement with the scientific community about where improvements and adjustments can be made. As Ms Rowley has indicated to you, there's a lot of noise in this area. There is the world of science and technology engaged in these areas, and of course there are areas of difference and improvement outside of that. There are people who make all sorts of claims in relation to parts of the evidence that they've read on either side of the argument. The job for government here is to work with the processes and frameworks and the experts to deliver the best possible approach, and that's what Australia does.
So no moratorium while that work is underway. You'll just keep approving the coal mine expansions.
Well, we will approve mining and resource projects, wind farm developments, solar. Large-scale solar developments.
I think those ones have methane associated with them, Minister.
All consistent with what is the world's leading environmental regulations, and we will continue to do that in the national interest, and we'll do it in a way that supports Australia's development, but we're doing it in a way that is consistent with the world's best environmental standards.
So no moratorium.
We're going to rotate the call, Senator Waters. Thanks, Chair. Senator Cadell.
Thank you, Chair. On to safeguard mechanisms and carbon leakage, if I can. So there was a November slide deck, November consultation paper out on that. Where are we on the process of looking at the carbon leakage?
Thanks very much, Senator. So, as you've referenced, we released the second consultation paper from the carbon leakage review, which was led by Professor Frank Yotso. We released that in early November and accepted submissions until the 3rd of December. So as you're aware, Senator, this has been a particularly sort of complex and technical review. The final report has not yet been provided to government, but we anticipate that will be provided to government soon.
Okay, so carbon leakage is, for those watching home, essentially when, I think your paper, I'll get the actual word, carbon leakage undermines the efforts to reduce emissions in relevant sectors, and the literature suggests that domestic efforts to reduce emissions are typically partially offset by resulting increase in net global. So shut down here, go somewhere else is basically that point. So,
that's correct, Senator.
Okay. So how much of Australia's steel, given that's a very topical thing, how much Australia's steel industry is covered by the safeguard mechanism?
Senator, I would have to take that on notice. Certainly the two, the BlueScope Port Kembla and the Whyalla Steelworks are both covered facilities. I understand also InfraBuild is covered in New South Wales. I just have to take on notice the proportion of any other covered.
For those big two, and I think the InfraBuild processing plant in Newcastle?
Exactly.
Right, okay. How much the cement industry?
Senator, the 100% of domestic cement production.
So when we're seeing government to take action, we're talking about steel and Whyalla specifically recently in the last week. I think on slide 12 on the slide deck, it expects over the next 5 years steel in treated flat products exports are set to decrease by circa 10% by 2030. Is that correct?
Senator, I just have to take on notice which slide deck you're referring to. We did.
Senator, I was going to ask that. Are you able to tell us what slide?
Yeah, part of the consultation process.
Okay. Yeah, so we did. We undertook a number of both public webinars and international.
I will take that on notice and ask someone listening in the office to text me.
Yeah.
Or even just bring it up.
Yeah,
got a copy
that's
of it
right.
And we can table it.
But well, is that the department's position that steel flatted products exports are set to decrease by 10%? Is that what you're understanding?
Take it on notice. I'm sorry, Senator.
There's been no work no looking at that so far?
So that any figures on those slides would be subject to a range of assumptions about different carbon prices both in Australia and internationally. So I just have to take on notice for you exactly the implications.
It was in the November consultation stuff. I'm just being texted.
So I think the difficulty is with, I know you're doing best endeavours to identify source, but right now as we sit here, we don't know whether the information is departmental information or could be from the members of it could be from the review itself.
Yes, thanks.
Which
and
of course is,
I would like to give you the assumptions that surround whatever figure it is. Thanks, Senator.
Okay, I will just talk very slowly while someone's typing a message to me for 2 seconds. So what time are we expecting to have this review consultation, this process given to government?
Soon, Senator.
Soon, like so many reports last at the end of this period of estimates, or that soon, or are we talking months?
I'd say within a couple of weeks, Senator.
Okay, so at the end of estimates. Okay. Was there any economic...
Senator, obviously, we should be a little bit adult about this. There is a review being undertaken. Yep. I'm not close to the review, but there is a little bit going on in global steel markets. The government has undertaken something that I notice Mr Dutton belatedly has supported. It's something he never would have done if he was in government. The government has taken unprecedented action to make sure that Australia has future steel making capability in Whyalla. We have supported the aluminium sector to ensure that there is a process going on across global steel making and global aluminium manufacturing as companies shift their production processes to lower or zero emissions production processes, largely to do with their use of electricity. The question for Australia from a strategic perspective is that activity going to happen in Australia or is it going to happen somewhere else? It is not up for debate in these companies about what direction, what the direction of travel is for those enterprises, and it is of significance for Australia from an employment perspective, from a strategic perspective, that activity happens in Australia. In terms of carbon leakage, I just point out gently that there are also opportunities in this area to secure low or zero emissions production of products here in Australia because of our unique comparative advantages, all of which is opposed by your side of politics in a sort of boneheaded, anti-Australian, anti-industry, hyper-ideological sort of way. And the implication that the core assumption that sits underneath the Coalition's $600 billion publicly funded electricity plan is to force electricity-intensive manufacturing offshore. That is the core to the position, and it's also core to, as we discovered, if we're talking about slide deck, Senator, Mr Taylor's slide deck that became publicly available a few weeks ago, we was urging, before he came into Parliament, urging the aluminium industry to go offshore because he said they weren't competitive, didn't have confidence in Australian manufacturing. So, we're going to, there will be this review, will take its course. But this is a government that's not going to act according to the estimates schedule or the political schedule. As you tried to observe, we're not deferring these questions until after estimates. We're dealing with these questions in the national interest in a set of areas that are of real strategic importance, and we're not going to play silly politics with it.
Thank you, Chair. I will take the point that, we said respectful. We're using boneheaded by the Minister here. We heard these things. There is one person making this political, and it's you. We are used to the political games of not getting answers before estimates so we can ask the right questions. We're used to the fact that you raise the aluminium program. Why, if we are making the cleanest and cheapest energy in the world, do we have to give $2 billion to the people that are using the cleanest energy in the world? Because it is a falsehood. There is one person playing games here. We are going around handing money to all these people that should benefit from this so-called clean energy and emission stuff, but you characterise it as something else. You don't have to hand out money if it is cheap. So you can choose one choice. One choice. It is cheap energy that will make our industries competitive, or they need to be bailed out because they won't. Pick one and stick to it, because you can't have both. Well, when I come to this other point, and I go to this question, it is the consultation deck number 2, carbon leakage review, second consultation paper, is the slide deck I'm referring to, where it's page 12, and it suggests, your own government papers and departments suggest, we will lose market share to overseas by carbon leakage. Those things I've read. On that page, steel treated flat products decreased by 10% of exports. Crude steel exports are set to decrease by 7%. Cement clinker exports to imports to increase by 25%. We went through this future made in Australia. It's a future assembled in Australia because your policies are nothing more than logos. You want to call them boneheaded? No one has sunk to that political level except you here today, when we are trying to get questions specifically on government documents and you make it political. I will not go any further than that, but on those documents, so on that paper, I go, Ms Johnson, where did those assumptions come from on that document that makes those assumptions?
So, Senator, I don't have that in front of me, but I will say that the illustrated estimates from things like carbon leakage were really set out as for the purposes of being an illustrative example. And so that, for example, assumed no carbon costs in other countries. Now, obviously, that's really at the upper bounds then of any sort of change in production. And so really what I think we were looking at there as part of the review was to aim to identify, so we looked at 73 commodities, and we were looking to identify those that may be at emerging carbon risk, importantly over the medium term rather than to the short term. which, as that deck would have said, showed that the safeguard settings, including things like trade exposed baseline adjustment, the funding under the Powering the Region Fund, are appropriate and sufficient in the short to medium term to manage carbon leakage risk. So really it was about showing the relative differences across commodities rather than looking to fix on a particular figure.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to rotate. And here is the document. I'm happy to rotate the call.
Fantastic. Thank you.
That's just for later. You can table, but yeah, rotate.
Would you like?
Yeah, thanks, Senator.
I'm sure you've seen many a slide deck. Just maybe easier if you've got it in front of you.
Thank you.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Right.
We will go to Senator Roberts. Senator Roberts, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for appearing today. The Minister and the Secretary have both individually promised that you'll be able to give me the answers to my questions on costs of climate and energy policy. I've asked about the costings of 76 policies twice, last October and last May.
Do you want
questions
to
on notice
SQ24. Yeah, thank you. Give us the reference of those questions on notice so the officials can have them in front of them.
Sure. SQ24-001186. So here we go. For each policy that I list, please provide the actual amount spent in the last 3 years and the amount to be spent in the forward estimates.
So,
First policy is securing...
Senator Roberts, can I just stop you there? I'm not sure that any of us have the stomach for you to read out all 74 of those policies. Maybe we could go to the substance of the response, and maybe I'm just looking at it now. Maybe the officials could just give you a sense of why they haven't filled in your table.
Thank you.
Sure, I'm happy with that.
Yeah, thank you, Senators. So Kushla Munro, Deputy Secretary responsible for climate change. So just to confirm, just in relation to your question on notice, Senator Roberts, so SQ24001186, they were questions directed to the department, and as you know, there are a number of measures that are responsibility for a number of other departments. In our answer to you, Senator Roberts, what the department did was outline the sort of comprehensive set of climate change policies, and we made reference to that. But the fundamental part to answering the question was, in fact, the reference to the portfolio budget statements, where all the details about those programs are available. So that's both from the department's perspective, and then you also have the broader budget papers themselves.
So you're still refusing to give me the individual costs? I can see it's the last paragraph of your answer.
I mean, happy, Jason Mundy is here. He's happy to elaborate a little bit further at this time.
Well, good morning, Senator. I'm Jason Mundy, the Division Head of Climate Change Policy, Adaptation and Risk. As Ms Munro was outlining there, part of the complexity in endeavouring to answer this question on notice was that it contains a number of different elements which aren't readily answered in the form that was requested. So, under the circumstances, by far the most reliable source for information on spending is the budget papers. So, of course, where a program is a significant spending program and it's within the responsibility of this department, it's possible, obviously, to track expenditure. So, for example, Senator, on some of the specific programs that are within the purview of this department, the answers to your questions are available and can be seen in the budget papers, and a couple of examples of those are For example, in the 22-23 October budget paper number 2, for example, Powering Australia community batteries for the household sector will track the spend over the preceding 3 years, demonstrating that there was $46.6 million spent over those 3 years, and it'll also track the forward estimates for expenditure over the forward estimates, demonstrating there's $175.8 million in forward estimates. So really, Senator, the budget papers are very much the best point of reference for answering your question, and that was the substance of our response.
Thank you very much. I read that response. Multiple agencies are discussed. Is there any person or agency, perhaps I direct this to the Minister, is there any person or agency overseeing and coordinating the total cost and the interactions of the various policies? And who is that person?
Of the range of government policies in terms of energy.
There are 76 of them, Minister, that we asked about.
Well, there may be.
Let's just talked about complexity and the most reliable answer. So I'm just concerned about the reliability of what's happening in our country.
Minister, I'm not sure that you've got it in front of you, but I've just had a quick skim of those 74, and there are things like engagement with First Nations community, which I would imagine covers a vast number of the 74 on the list. I think the way you've characterised this, Senator Roberts, would probably make it quite difficult, Minister. I don't know.
Well, I'm not sure whether it's a list of policies that are relevant in terms of energy, more broadly electricity, climate, the environment, or it's a list of things that One Nation Party doesn't like. It's very difficult to answer your question, Senator. There may be more of these programs. The truth is that there are a range of course, commitments that the government has made. The previous government signed up to net zero objectives. That was supported by the Labor Party. We have a practical, common sense plan to achieve objectives like getting the electricity system to 82%. To make sure that electricity for households is the lowest cost, most reliable framework, renewables and storage backed up by gas peaking capability. That of course cuts across all sorts of government activity in terms of the relationship between these areas of production and the risks that Senator Cadell was referring to, of course, in terms of a range of areas that the government's active around, in terms of Australia's future competitiveness, carbon leakage, all these sorts of questions, but also the opportunities for Australia that sit at the nexus of energy policy, what's going on in markets around the world for our mining and resources sectors. Like, these are areas that, of course, engage all of the departments who will be in front of this committee here today, but also the Department of Industry, Science and Resources, the Treasury, the Trade Portfolio, the Prime Minister. This is a cabinet-style government. This is a proper Westminster-style cabinet government where ministers make decisions in accordance with their portfolios, and the budget is administered by the Treasurer and the Finance Minister in the way that you'd expect. A list of programs that sit across government, that perhaps I'm not quite sure what the motivation is for sort of clustering them all together, but you know, the department can answer for the programs that it's responsible for. If there are broad questions about how these matters are coordinated across government, I suppose there's opportunities in Prime Minister and Cabinet estimates and Treasury estimates to traverse those questions as well.
Well, Minister, your government is spending more than $30 billion a year on climate and related energy policies. There's a massive, complex web of regulations, programs, schemes, and what you've just told me is that there's no one who can oversee the lot and put their finger on everything that's happening. We've seen other areas of spending in this government and previous governments derailed. Not people not knowing where the money's going, and I'm really concerned about that. We've just heard the previous witness talking about the complexity and the reliability. We don't know the impact on the natural environment of these policies, the impact on the human environment, the impact on the economic environment. It just seems that it's out of control. $30 billion plus.
Well, that's
I'll give you a couple of minutes to respond, Minister, and then we're going to go to a break.
Well, I'll take 10 seconds, just or 20. That's a figure that you assert. I'm not sure what the source for that, whether it's work that your office has done to try and aggregate spending across government in all of the areas that you're concerned about, or whether it's sourced from some other One Nation document, but I have not got that figure in front of me. The truth is, modern government's complex, Senator. Australia is facing a complex environment. Simple one-word or two-word slogans are not a substitute for actually having competent government dealing with these issues in a common sense and sensible and pragmatic kind of way, and that is what the government is doing. That's our job.
Thank you, Chair.
We'll now suspend for a tea break, and we will return with Outcome 1, Program 1.1 at 11:05.